Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, March 28th, 2023 fiscal years 2024 and 2025 budget workshop number 2. Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Director Chan?
Present.
All of the mics should be on. Director Coleman?
Present.
Director Lenny?
Here.
Director McIntosh?
Here.
Director Patterson?
Present.
Director Young?
Here.
President Katz is on his way.
If members of the public are online and wish to make public comment, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Madam Secretary, are there any public comments?
I have no hands for public comment. I do have one speaker card for someone in person, and Eric Larson would like to speak before the workshop.
Before as in now?
Yes.
Okay. So, come on up, Eric. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Director McIntosh. My name is Eric Larson. I'm president of AFSCME Local 444. AFSCME Local 444. I did request to speak before the budget presentation today because I've come before the board many times with concerns about contracting out of fully maintained and operated contract services, and we think that this budget proposal goes a long ways towards addressing those concerns. AFSCME Local 444 is supportive of the proposed fiscal year 24-25 East Bay MUD budget. We feel the proposed added positions and agreement that we have come to with management regarding the proposed added positions go a long way to addressing our ongoing concerns about over-reliance on fully maintained and operated contract services and help reduce contracting out of East Bay MUD jobs. We disagree about contracting out operation of slurry separation at district facilities. This work should be performed by district forces. Nonetheless, the overall budget proposal addresses many of our contracting out concerns. We do have some concerns that there is no funding for technical trainer, for trades training in education or outreach, or in diversity, equity, and inclusion portions of the budget. Internships and workforce development do not support recruitment for full-time permanent positions. There's no direct path for limited term or part-time to permanent civil service status. The best way to create entry points to the trades for underrepresented segments of our community is to hire trades at the entry level, but that requires trainers and training programs. For instance, we have a $30,000 backhoe simulator that entry-level employees could be training on to help qualify for heavy equipment operator jobs, but we have no trainer or training program to run the simulator. We ask that you direct workforce development to provide training resources for trades to provide more opportunities for internal promotion and advancement. The other concern we have is about deferral of capital investments at SD1 in building a new dewatering building. From a labor perspective, this is the worst place to work in all of SD1. It's absolutely the dirtiest station, and there have been numerous safety concerns due to foul air sickening employees and constant breakdowns creating solids backups throughout the SD1. SD1 desperately needs a new dewatering plant, but Local 444 overall supports the proposed budget that you'll be receiving today. Thank you for the opportunity to provide my comments.
Thank you, Eric. If there are no other speakers online or in person, I'll turn it over to General Manager Chan, who will open the workshop.
Good morning, board members. Back in January, we held our first budget workshop for the fiscal year 24 and 25 budget and rates. We shared some of the new challenges that arose between the last budget and this budget, and despite our best planning efforts, there were events that we just couldn't predict. This includes the impacts of the pandemic, which led to unprecedented supply chain issues, inflation at levels we haven't seen in the last 40 years, which has increased our costs across the board, a 3-year drought, where we saw our already reduced consumption, a drop from around 153 million gallons per day in 2021 to a projected 130 million gallons per day in 2023. We also saw failures of our infrastructure, including the wastewater interceptors and one of the worst algal blooms in the bay in decades. During the workshop, we presented 2 alternatives and you shared your support for us to continue to invest in our infrastructure and our workforce, which in turn is an investment in our community as we enter the next 100 years of service. But we understand that this investment will affect those who are already struggling to pay their bills. Following the budget workshop, we held our Customer Assistance Program workshop in February and proposed several enhancements to our program to support even more of those most in need. And you will receive today, at the board's request, business cards that you can hand out that will take people to our Customer Assistance Program. Today, we're holding our second budget workshop. In our presentation, we'll share information in response to questions from the last workshop, provide an overall budget summary, and then share details on our water and wastewater budgets. With your support, our goal is to mail the Proposition 218 notice at the end of this month or early April. At your places is the draft 218 notice. As part of this budget, we'll continue our public outreach efforts. We have already presented at a number of community meetings and the Alameda and Contra Costa County Mayor's Conferences. We'll stop at the end of each section for board questions and have built in time for a break. I'll now pass it on to Sophia Scota, our Finance Director, to begin the workshop.
Good morning, board members and members of the public. Thank you for being here. This, as General Manager Chan said, is the presentation of our second budget workshop, after which we're hoping to receive approval to move forward with a notice to be sent to the public. Today's speakers are myself and our Manager of Budget, Sam Feldman. So as we start off Budget Workshop 2, and as already summarized by General Manager Chan, these are the sections that will comprise today's workshop. I will be giving you an introduction and covering our follow-up from Workshop 1, and then Sam will be covering the budget summary and going over some details of the water and wastewater system budgets, after which I'll be back up at the podium for our rates and charges and discussion of outreach and next steps, and there will be a break there in the middle. That's okay. I'm sure I can. There. Is that not the right way to do this?
Now you can use the arrows.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's okay. I don't mind using the clicker. It's fine. Thank you. Okay, so by way of introduction, this budget supports entering our next century of service. So 2023 celebrates our 100-year anniversary, 100 years of providing clean, reliable, affordable drinking water to our East Bay communities and protection of the Bay for more than 70 years. The photo on the left, the original construction of Party Dam, and a more recent shot of Party Dam on the right. And as we've been going out in our public tour of this budget and of the investments that we are proposing to make, we have characterized this as really a generational investment. I think this just went out. Okay. All right, thank you. A generational investment that we have stood on the shoulders of giants, those that invested 100 years ago, and that now is the time to continue on the work that we started a couple of budget cycles ago. And this is the largest single investment in capital that we have made since the original construction of Party Dam. So when we look at challenges that we are facing into the future, there's the challenge of aging infrastructure. One of the pieces of information that we've been sharing as we've gone on our public tour has been around the pipelines in our service area, and that I've shared the story with our public many times that going out with one of our crews, fixing a pipe in West Oakland in one of our neighborhoods, not far here from our headquarters, and the pipe being designated in one of our software packages as CI93. And I said, well, what does that mean? And the person that was leading that particular crew said, that's cast iron. And they said, and that 93, that's not 1993. So 1893 pipes. climate change, the droughts, floods, and fires that we've all experienced, even in this one last year, we're having to deal with all of those things at our water and wastewater facilities and the changing water quality that comes with all of those three. We have discussed the nature of the emerging contaminants, and that's linked also with changing regulation, PFAS, and other constituents and contaminants that our treatment systems are going to have to work with to continue to provide clean water to our public. Nutrients in the bay, as mentioned by General Manager Chan, the algal blooms, and the creativity that we're going to need to address treatment of those nutrients, treatment and removal. We talked a little bit about the changing regulations with respect to the emerging contaminants, but all of those changing regulations have impacts on our costs. And so again, we need to incorporate all of those in the budget. And then most recently, we've become critically aware of the inflationary cost pressures in things like equipment, energy, chemicals, and labor. So these are challenges that we are facing and that we are addressing in this budget moving forward. So I mentioned the generational investment, that this is the most capital-intensive period in our history, aside from the original construction of Party Dam. During the next 5 years, we will have spent more than $500 million more compared with our prior budget. When we look at our rate increases in FY24 and 25, which we'll cover later in this presentation, the rate increases that are proposed will accelerate the investments in our system that will enable us to be the reliable and resilient system that we need to be, both on the water and wastewater side, into the future. We will be issuing debt consistent with the discussions that we've had in the past. We've been trying to make sure that there is room for critical emergencies should there be a large earthquake or other natural disaster, that there will be room to use debt to try to moderate rate increases from the kinds of investments that we'll need to make after that type of an event. But we are trying to also use debt issuance to try to moderate the rate increases and support intergenerational equity so that future customers are also paying for those investments. As I said, that 1893 pipe continuing to serve today, we simply patched that leak, so it's still in service. And so we do want to make sure that everyone that will benefit from our capital is in fact paying for that. When we look at long-term financial stability, we know that needs to be a part of entering our next century of service. So it requires, of course, that we are careful with our expenses, that we are considerate of what affordable rates look like, particularly in a community where we have 25% of our households with incomes greater than $200,000 a year and 25% of our households with incomes less than $50,000 a year. We believe that the rate increases that we'll be bringing forward are as low as is reasonable to support good service. Again, although we will be issuing debt, we believe that we are doing so responsively and that we will be looking in this budget to leverage external funding, and we'll talk more about that as well. I do want to add that EBMUD is the only water utility in the state of California that holds a AAA rating with Moody's. We continue to hold our S&P AAA, but there are other water agencies that hold a AAA from Standard & Poor's. So again, this budget does continue to support long-term financial stability. So when we look at ourselves, and our desire to be a financial community and environmental steward, the other piece of information that we continue to share, because it's important to the public, is that we are in fact a not-for-profit public agency. We do not have shareholders, and any rate dollars that come in over what is required to meet our needs simply goes to additional infrastructure and operations and offsets future rate increases. So we believe that the budget that our team has put forward today prepares us to meet the needs of the next century. And we are seeking board direction today to support this budget and to launch the community engagement process, which will mean sending a Proposition 218 notice that would culminate in a Prop 218 hearing on June the 13th. Okay, so with that, we're concluding the introduction phase and entering the follow-up from Workshop 1 phase. So one of the questions that was asked during our first budget workshop was, what are the deferred projects from what we saw in the infrastructure workshop in the fall to what's being proposed in the budget, since everything couldn't be included? And these are some of the major projects. So you'll see here what the projects are, and then some of the timing delays, and then kind of what that dollar value is. Are there any specific questions on this slide? With that, I'll move to the next slide, which is kind of a look into the next 6 to 10 year of the CIP. The question was, gosh, it seems like there's a big lump in 6 to 10 years. So you've shown us the 0 to 5 year CIP. What else is in that big lump in that 6 to 10 year? And so you'll see there here some of the major projects and when we are projecting to start construction on those projects as well. On the wastewater side, the projects that were deferred in the 5-year CIP include the dewatering building. I do want to add that work on the dewatering building is beginning now, that the planning and design is going to begin. And in fact, the construction will begin inside of the 5-year period. Because the dewatering building is such a critical piece of operation, a critical piece needed for operations at the wastewater plant, and because we're going to need to work while we are constructing, it's a long construction period. Approximately 5 years is the estimate at this point. And so while that's starting inside of the 5-year period, it will be concluded in the second 5-year period. These are projects on the wastewater side that are in that lump that was noted in the 6 to 10 year period. So including seismic retrofit of our primary sedimentation tanks, clarifier work, and some work on interceptors as well. So in this budget, we are going to be focusing on looking for state, federal, and other grant funding for our capital improvement program. Staff believes that there are opportunities in the Infrastructure Renewal Act and other federal programs, and that also includes FEMA. We are adding for the first time a full-time position as a grant writer. We've looked at several other agencies that have these positions, and it appears that having someone really focused and dedicated and really looking at the metrics for what that person is bringing in can be a valuable sort of addition to a budget. And so we are moving forward with that for the first time, and we'll continue to keep the board updated on that. That said, state and federal funding often comes with additional requirements. And so there are costs that are associated with that. And so we will be and have added in some cases to the budget the costs of additional compliance. I do want to give an example of something that's upcoming. Currently, there's an opportunity in wastewater for $30 million in grant funding to do seismic retrofit of our influent pump station, which is a critical piece of equipment at the front end of the plant. And currently, we believe that we will be able to secure these funds, and that obviously is positive on behalf of our ratepayers. Sorry.
Just on the Infrastructure Renewal Act. You mean the Inflation Reduction Act or the IIJA, which is the infrastructure and whatever that ends up being called? Is it the infrastructure bill that was passed before, or the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed? I'm not familiar with the Infrastructure Renewal Act.
I think this is the previous act.
Okay, so it's the first one.
Yes. But hopefully there are also
I don't think it's called the Infrastructure Renewal Act. You might want to change that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Just IRA, because everybody says IRA, and that's IRA, so I'm just trying to figure out which is which.
Thank you. So another piece that's a little bit different in this budget moving forward with respect to our capital infrastructure is that we will be piloting a planned infrastructure equity toolkit. This is modeled after an AWWA toolkit around community stewardship. The project phases on the left, capital planning, project design, pre-construction and impact evaluation, financing, contracting and procurement, customer service, community and communications, environmental stewardship, and then construction. So the actions are in the middle column. So just as an example, during capital planning, ask if a project considers disparities in service and service quality, and an example or an opportunity might be community meetings really should consider work schedules and childcare for different communities, because those aren't necessarily the same in every community. For project design, we're asking, as part of this toolkit pilot, for designers and planners to consider positive co-benefits, also looking at ways to reduce the project's impacts. And an example there might be, have enhancements been considered for communities with lower public participation? So in certain neighborhoods, we know that neighbors are very active and come out when we hold community meetings during the planning and design phase. But, sort of a call here for staff to become the advocates in those communities where maybe people aren't showing up, or understanding why they aren't and digging in. So those are the kinds of things that this toolkit is trying to get at. So the team is excited and daunted by this challenge. So with respect to the impact of the CIP on customers and community, there are currently 2 projects that are hopefully going to be using this pilot toolkit. And so Fontaine Pumping Plant and then East 16th Street Cluster Pipeline are two projects that have been targeted at present and sort of in the community engagement phase right now. And then the kind of core questions through the work that everyone's been doing as part of kind of trying to learn to apply an equity lens, and all the trainings that Darian and his team have been doing throughout the district, try to focus on 4 foundational questions: who benefits and who is burdened by the work, who's missing from the planning dialogue, how will we measure community impacts, and how do we address or mitigate negative, adverse, and unintended consequences. So this is new for our engineers and designers and planners. It's going to be a challenge. Everything's not going to be perfect the first time, but I think we all are, as I said, excited and daunted by the challenge. I think it will be a good thing. There also was a question about budgeted versus filled position history. So the budgeted positions is the blue line at the top, and the filled positions is the red line below. There is always a gap between those two. And the reasons for that include turnover due to promotions, retirements, other separations, temporary assignments, all of those kinds of things. It's held pretty steady. If you look at the sort of gap between those lines. The current vacancy rate is just under 7% currently. Historically, it has varied between 5 and 8%, and we do find that in times of economic uncertainty that there are lower vacancies as people delay job shifts or retirements and so on. There was another question that was raised about how much interest we pay on our debt, and while it's somewhat of a technically complicated question to answer, the way that we're answering it here is showing our last series of long-term debt issuances, and so you can see the rate there: 2.7, 3.6, 3.2, 3.84, 3.85 for the most recent issuance. But sort of in that 2.5, to 3.5 has been sort of where we've fallen. We do hold some commercial paper, which is short term and resets, on a very short term basis. There were times during the pandemic where we were paying 0.1% on that portfolio, and more recently they've been around 3% as those rates have been trending higher. And we have been paying off commercial paper, and there will be additional payoff of commercial paper in this next year as well. We'll be bringing that to the board. There were questions also on work that we do in the FM&O area. And so there was a survey that was conducted by phone after the first budget workshop. And what we learned from that survey is that 65% of our FM&O contractors employ union staff. 30 out of 39 firms did respond to the survey that were called, and it represents about 4,300 total employees. And so that's just a graphic that represents that data. And then with respect to the FM&O contracts and suppliers, something that I think is particularly interesting is that nearly 90% of our FM&O spending in FY22 basically went to contractors who meet one or more of our CEP goals. And so on the right, you can see the percent of contract spending in our CEP goal areas. So small business, local business, ethnic minority, or woman-owned business. When it comes to education and outreach programs in the budget, we are adding one FTE in public affairs to coordinate district-wide educational programs. That was pointed out by our speaker, Eric Larson. And so I think this is a very positive thing, that this is a full-time person that will be focusing on this. We will be looking at community outreach opportunities. I believe Director Young and Director Katz mentioned interest in looking at specifically transportation to bring students to the watershed with a focus on our underserved communities. So that would be included, kind of looking at that in the purview of that FTE. And there will also be evaluation of funding opportunities to support community partners. A question was also raised by Eric about diversity, equity, and inclusion. From a big picture perspective, the Office of DEC, Diversity, Equity, and Culture, which is the name of the office that Derry manages, is growing by 31 positions to a total of 62 positions. So 21 positions, about a third, are regular FTEs in the spaces of contract equity, internal training and development, and supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, including the work that we talked about with regards to development of the CIP Equity Toolkit. And then 41% are for workforce development. And so those are internships and other opportunities. We'll talk a little bit more about them later, but we think this is incredibly positive. When it comes to what other agencies are doing, the work that we did in discussing this with Metropolitan, LADWP, the SFPUC San Diego, and Valley Water is that there was kind of a range, 15 to 40 college-level internship positions annually in addition to trade apprenticeships. So again, a very positive investment here. Another question that was raised by Eric, and hopefully this is responsive, is, what's the linkage? How do these flow and end up in full-time employment? And so this is a graphic that attempts to show that. So through our relationship with the Peralta colleges, there's the junior ranger intern, web design help desk intern, junior engineer intern, industrial machining, maintenance, and mechanics intern, and electrical and instrumentation technology interns. And so the idea is that those can flow into either LT or part-time positions and then eventually into full-time district civil service positions. So in the LT and part-time category, there are the LT or PT Ranger Naturalist. We have an IT intern category, engineering aide, and LT junior engineer, and community employment trainee. And then in terms of the full-time district regular civil service positions that we have the Ranger Naturalists, IT engineer, software engineer, and network analyst. These are all sort of entry-level, junior engineer, etc. So this is hopefully a graphic that explains how these fit together. And we believe that the work that the ODEC office is doing is creating a more clear and streamlined kind of vision, and hopefully over time that will be communicated to people that are interested in careers in these areas. With regards to funding for diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have increased in this budget non-labor funding by nearly $400,000 to support the DEI strategic plan and two-year action plan to increase training and development and accelerate our workforce development efforts, and also to prepare internal staff for management positions, which has been an area of interest and something the district hasn't focused on for some time. There had been a big effort at one time. We also are increasing, and this is separate from that $400,000, increasing funding for throughout the district in different areas where it applies for translation and language services. some of this is required by federal funding, and so we're going to be making these investments, and then that will be required as we go ahead and pursue and hopefully obtain additional federal funding. And this is just an example of one of our drought messages. This one that's shown here is in Chinese, and you'll see them throughout our service area, also in English and in Spanish. A last question that was asked was in regards to the CIP and how it was addressing our major challenges. So this graphic kind of shows about 50% of the budget really dedicated to aging infrastructure, and then the next big pieces there with regards to emerging contaminants and climate change is the next two big pieces. Hopefully this graphic is helpful. All right, with that, I will hand it off to Sam Feldman.
And we can pause here too if there are any questions from the board.
Hello? On? I'm going back to the slide, and it was in reference to the FMNO contracts and supplier responsibility. The breakdowns for ethnic minority or women-owned, do you have a breakdown of what percentage is ethnic minority and which percentage is about women-owned businesses?
I don't have it in the data that was provided. I will check in and see if we can get it answered during the break and then come back.
All right.
Thank you.
Following actually the previous slide to that, do we have on the yes or mixed category on slide 19 information that's more granular about percentages?
I don't believe that we do, but I will confirm that.
Because if 10% is way different than 80% or 90% or et cetera.
Thank you.
There are several groups, one in the Richmond area and about 3 in the Oakland area, where you have community-led groups who are trying to make a connection. And that's a viable area to look to. I would suggest that staff look into those opportunities because these folk are already working to condition young people, people who've never been exposed to any of what we do. And that connection could facilitate another source of bringing people on.
Yeah, we have those, and we're going to be reaching out to them.
Okay.
Thank you.
If I could, John, Director Coleman, on slide deck 11, I was I wasn't sure. You talked about the San Joaquin County EBMUD ground banking. So we're looking at that fiscal year 2031 to start it. That has a huge potential for us to meet our water supply goals, does it not? How much water could we look at storing there in that partnership with San Joaquin County? And like a year like this year, and hopefully other years that maybe not as intense as this year, we could be doing a lot of groundwater storage to meet our needs and the valley needs as well.
Yeah, and for that project, I mean, we're going to be continuing to work. As you know, the Couts Farm is the only farm that signed on to participate in that, and we're going to continue, hopefully with his participation, get others to join in. And as more people join in, then that capacity can increase. But a large part of the DREAM project does rely on other farms participating in that program.
So how many other farms do we need to participate to make the DREAM project a reality?
I mean, right now with him, I mean, the goal is to get around, I think it's around 10 million gallons per day. Mike, is that right?
17,000 acre feet.
17,000 acre feet per year, which is, I don't know how that translates into MGD, but.
Yeah, I'm not sure the conversion either. So that's, it's not that we're not talking to San Joaquin County between now and 2031. We will continue to have those conversations and develop a program, but we know from the past that even to expand the pilot program, which is not finished yet, we're still piloting the DREAM test, But even to expand that program is going to take a few years to develop the partnerships, the concept, the environmental documentation before we can actually get to the construction of the project. So that's why it's out at 2031.
Is there any way to speed that process up?
It's possible, certainly.
Well, I would just hope that that's something we'd look at, especially in a year like this. Be a perfect opportunity to put more water into the ground for storage needs for both us and San Joaquin County.
But as far as speeding up, Mike, I mean, that does require more people to sign on to the partnership.
That's right. It's a partnership, right? It takes both sides to be agreeable to that program.
But the Cows Farm is very influential in the area, so we hope that by him participating in the program, we'll get others to help build that trust.
Okay.
The proposal, the budget proposal coming in at the high end of comparable agencies in terms of supporting the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative of having internship and trade apprenticeship programs. What I'm interested in is it seems like there's kind of a multi-department character to those roles. They will provide support for our diversity, equity, and culture initiative, but they will also be day-to-day working in respective departments. Could you characterize generally what departments they'll be supporting and what that distribution is like, and then maybe we can get some follow-up written material that just identifies it.
We can do that.
I had one last question. And it's on slide 22. It piggybacks on Andy, support diversity, equity, and inclusion. So 41% or 41 or 66% are for workforce development. So are they part-time? Are they, what is that?
It is a mix, and we can provide a deeper breakdown there, but it's a mix of either LT, which is limited term, but it's a full-time position during that limited term, either a year or 2 years. Like the ranger naturalists tend to be those, although there's some part-time, which would be, there's actually a couple ways you can do it. Like a part-time engineering aide could be a summer intern from a local college, or where they're working, close to full-time or full-time during the summer, but not the full year. Or it could be part-time where they work 20 hours a week for the full year. So
it would be great to see that
breakdown
in
part-time.
writing.
Yeah, we can do
Thank
that.
you.
Let me ask one quick question. The governor now is focusing, now making money available for some of the things that we're discussing now. That's an added source of possible usage of funds. And my question is, how are we prepared to receive that? And are we interacting with any of the staff from the state who are working specifically on this?
Yeah, that is an area for growth for us, is getting external funding. Part of it is we're proposing the budget one position for grant writing, and that's maybe the traditional term for it, but it's often cultivating the relationships or the knowledge of how to get this external funding. And so we pursue it now, and departments are currently responsible for it, but we want to sort of provide added support at a central way. And
the reason I mention that is because we tend to be further into that area than most water agencies in the state, and thereby we should be, almost bootstrapped to the state in this, because it's going to reduce what it costs our ratepayers in the long term and benefit us by D&I and all the other programs that we're involved in.
Yeah, that is the goal.
I did forget to mention one thing in response to an issue that was raised by Mr. Larson with regards to the equipment and not having a trainer, and the district is pursuing an external trainer to be able to utilize that piece of equipment. So thank you for mentioning that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Great. So we'll go to the budget summary here, and starting on, it's not labeled, but slide 26, to jump back into it. So I want to start with this general overview of what we'll be discussing today in my section here. As you know, we have our two systems, water and wastewater. Water represents 83% of the appropriations that are proposed this year on the 2-year total, and wastewater is 17%. And then in the three major categories we'll be talking a lot about today, it's capital appropriation and debt service represent a combined 61%, or almost 2/3 of the appropriations. We tend to group those together, as the board knows, but for the public and others, that we group those two together because debt service is paying for the past issuance of debt, which funded capital projects. So really both of those categories are funding our capital reinvestment, which is a big part of an agency like ourselves, the work and expense of providing water and wastewater service. And then operations, of course, is 39% there, and a big portion of that, as you'll see in a minute, is our labor costs as well. And looking at this another way, just for the first year of the biennial budget, it's a slightly different view, but it breaks down the total appropriations, capital improvement program, and debt service again, 60%, 64% in this case. And then the other sort of those total operations is now broken down into water service and wastewater service being the primary expenses and appropriations. Support services, very necessary part of our work. I say that because finance is in there, as well as ISD, our Information Services Department, our HR department, as well as engineering is there. So that's 6%. And then customer service is 2%. That includes some of our outreach programs in other parts of the district besides just the customer service department. Finally, natural resource management protection, another 2%. When we look at total appropriations and comparison to fiscal year 2023, the proposed appropriations for fiscal 24 are $1.4 billion, and it will go down a little bit to $1.26 billion in fiscal year 2025 for total combined appropriations of $2.7 billion over the 2 years. And I want to note two things here. So first, in fiscal year 2023, there's that small red bar there, $33.3 million. That is our appropriations for operating costs associated with the drought that the board approved last June. And we are not expecting or budgeting for a drought in the next 2 years. So there is no drought appropriations over these 2 years. And then you may note here that the capital appropriation is lower in the second year than it is in the first year. So that is the source of the decline in appropriations in the second year. And that's because we talk, this is in this presentation, the last time we'll talk about a capital appropriation. There are two concepts in capital world. One is the appropriation, one's cash flow or expense. And appropriation is the legal authority the board approves to spend money over a multi-year period. So we typically need those appropriations at the start of a major phase of a project. For example, construction, we need the appropriations at the beginning so we can make sure contracts can go out and are approved and we can agree to them. But the capital expenses or the capital cash flow is what I'll talk about through the rest of the presentation. And that's really based on annual expected spending, which could be for a variety of projects, but it's just in that year what checks are going to be sent out. So we don't expect a decrease in the capital expenses over the 5-year, but the appropriations we do need a little bit higher in that first year of the biennial budget. Okay, so major drivers of increased expenses here on the next slide. We've talked about these at the first workshop, so I won't belabor it too much, but capital, and we've talked about it already, that capital investments are a big reason that we are seeing increased expenses over the 2- and 5-year projection. And in the 5-year period, we do our capital planning on a 5-year basis for the budget. We expect about a $500 million increase in the 5-year CIP, or it's about a 24% to prior 5-year CIPs. And then other elements, all in the operating side of the budget, is operating labor is expected to increase about 17% in 2024 compared to the current fiscal year, 2023. And that's driven by both increases in staff as well as inflation and the costs necessary to make sure our employees can continue to live in our area. And chemicals as well are increasing substantially on a percentage basis, and $16 million combined for both systems compared to our actual expenses in 2022. So a pretty significant increase there. And then energy costs also compared to 2022, we're expecting a 33% increase, or 5.5 million. So those are big impacts on our expenses. Oh, I went backwards. There we go. And one of the things I mentioned, the reason operating labor is growing is in part due to added staff. So here is a total authorized staff count that's in the proposed budget. And you'll see in the first year of the biennial budget, the proposal has an increase of 3.3%, staff are 70.5 increase. And that is the highest FTE count that we can find in our history, and I would expect it's the highest as well. And in the second year, there is one more FTE on the water system, which we'll show a little bit later. So we'll talk through the purpose of these staff when we get to each system, because it's easier to talk about when we talk about each system. And finally, the last slide in the summary here is talking about the revenue side of the picture. And we'll talk more about the individual revenues of each system, but combining them together, I wanted to point out a key element here, which is that one of the reasons we are seeing an increase in, one of the ways we're covering the increase in expenses is planning to issue debt for our capital expenses. So as that capital program grows, we do expect to see increased debt issuance over the period. And so compared to the fiscal year 2023 projection, excluding drought, which is on the left side there, the total revenue will grow in the proposed budget by 36%. And of that 31%, so 31 of the 36 is from debt issuance in that year. And part of that is we do not plan to issue debt in this current fiscal year, even though we budgeted to do so. And so I'll get into a lot more detail about debt and revenues while we talk about each system. And so that concludes the big summary here. Any questions before I move to water? Okay. So I'm going to go through water system, and then before we go to wastewater, we'll take a break. So the water sales, so this is our key budgeting assumptions. And one of the things I want to talk about very briefly is the million gallons per day, which is always an important part of what we budget for. So in fiscal year 2022, our actual million gallon per day sales was 143.9. We budgeted 145.8 in the current fiscal year, but as the footnote notes, we're expecting it to be 137 million gallons per day based on current projections. So in the proposed budget, we expect to see an increase very slightly to 139.7 million gallons per day. This is a pretty typical pattern after a drought to see a resumption in consumption after a drought, but it doesn't jump back up to where it used to be. So we're not budgeting to go immediately back to 143.9 or even what it was before there was a drought in 22. And, old habits, right? People, once they start conserving water, they don't immediately stop. Someone told me yesterday, possibly as a joke, I'm not always good at reading that they still shower with a bucket. Even though our reservoirs are pretty full. So, and then in terms of the rate increases, as Sophia mentioned, you can see them there. And for the cost per day, I like talking about it that way because it makes it much more real for people. The cost per day for 8 CCF, which is our median or average monthly single-family residential customer that we refer to, it'll be $2.44 per day. And that's for 197 gallons per day, or roughly 3 to 5 bathtubs, depending on how big your bathtub is. So you get a lot of water for that $2.44. And the increase in cost per day is about 19 cents. And in the second year with the proposed rate increases, it would be $2.65 per day, or 21 cents per day increase in costs. And then finally here, we'll mention it, talk about it a little bit, but the proposed budget maintains strong debt service coverage, which is an important part of maintaining that AAA rating on the water system from both S&P and as well from Moody's. But it's also an indicator of how much our financial stability, long-term financial stability, a key district goal. So we're staying above our target there at right around 2 times. In terms of the operating revenues, the water system remains primarily driven by water charges, which are themselves primarily driven by volumetric charges. So there are increases, there are other revenue sources, property taxes being the next highest, SCC revenue being the second highest or third highest, power sales, interest income, reimbursements, and all other revenue. I'll talk about it a little bit more here, but that you can again see that big blue largest category at the bottom there is water charges, and we expect in the 24 budget that they'll go up total 4.4% compared to projections. And you may say, well, you're proposing an 8.5% increase. Why are water charges only going up 4.4%? That's driven by the consumption numbers that we expect in 24. So we see lower consumption overall, and an 8.5% increase adds up to a little bit less than 8.5. So in property taxes, we expect about steady revenues, about a $1 million growth there to $47 million total. Power sales, we expect revenue of about $8 million. That's what we're budgeting. I'll note that is significantly lower than the current projection for this fiscal year, which is $17 million. But we are conservative in that source because it really depends a lot on water availability, as well as the wholesale prices we're able to sell power for, and the timing of that, and the demand in the market. So it's a conservative projection at $8 million there. I think this is really interesting. Our budget for interest income next 2 years is roughly $13 million, $14 million. Next year alone, $13.9 million. We expect this year we'll get interest income of $10 million, but 2 years ago in FY22, that was just $2 million. So this is a really significant growth in interest income, and it's driven by the rate increases from the Federal Reserve and our ability to invest our investments in a strategic way while maintaining liquidity. SCC revenues we expect to be about the same this year as it was in the prior year, and then a slight increase in the second year, basically a continuation of or steadying of development trends, no increase expected there, and offset by an increase in the SCC charges of 8.5%. So a little bit slower development, but offset by those increases. And then reimbursements and all other we expect to be about the same year over year. Okay, in terms of expenses, we expect a 17% growth in the 2024 budget compared to our projection for 2023. And I want to note here, I talked about the difference between cash flow and appropriations for capital. We're now in the part of the presentation where I talk about capital cash flow, the annual expenses, not the board-approved appropriation, but the annual expense for the capital that we're going to get done in that current year. And so we've switched to capital cash flow. And you'll note an increase in our projected expenses of about 17% in the first year, and then about a 6% increase in the second year. Some of this increase will be offset by debt, but of course the rate increases are another big driver of how we meet our expenses and keep a balanced budget. And then I've talked about labor expenses, and just one thing I note, I'll switch between these two slides, slide 37 and 38. You'll note the blue bar here, operations, is $397.4 million in FY24. If we go over here, the blue bar is $309 million. So of the 397 in total operating expenses, 309 of that is our labor expenses and benefit costs associated with it. So healthcare, pension, et cetera. And so that is a 18% increase in the first year of the budget. We expect capital labor costs, which is the red hat on top of the operating labor costs, will increase by about 10.5%. And then in the second year, a little bit slower increase and due to cost of living and some other changes there. Okay. And then in terms of staffing summary, we see an increase in the FTE counts in FY24. It's a 3% increase for the water system in FTE, or 56 total FTE change, net change, and then there's one additional FTE change in FY25. And I'll note that 95% of all authorized positions are based on FTE, 95% are full-time civil service and the few civil service exempt we have. So most of our staff is full-time, by far. In terms of added staff, I said I would get to it, and here we go. So I'll note here that the biggest category for the FTE change or affected FTE is for aging infrastructure and reducing FMNO and contracting out. So I appreciate Eric coming today and talking about this, and a big chunk of those positions here are related to that. And we'll note here that you'll see the difference between the two columns for the water system. There are some changes that we note in the full budget book where the FTE count doesn't change, but the character of a position changes from maybe temporary construction or limited term. It's changing to regular civil service. So those don't change the count of the FTE, but it does affect FTE. So that would be why there's a difference between the two. And then in general, there are other items on aging infrastructure, other employees that not directly related to reducing FMNO and contracting out. So that's a 15 FTE increase. It's also support for staff, including some training and onboarding resources. That's 5 FTE. Workforce development, there's a change in net increase of 4 FTE. Meter replacement project, 3 FTE. Cybersecurity, on and on. I'll note the things we've talked about: grant writing, 1 FTE change. There's some also education and community outreach, a slide based on that FTE change as well. Yeah.
I think it's great to see the responsiveness in having positions dedicated to areas that are targeted to reduce FMNO and contracting out. It's good to see some of those discussions really resulting in some results, and I'm just glad to see that a little bit more, at the appropriate time, a little bit more information about just what kinds of FMNO contracts are changed, just so that we can understand the full trend and the successful strategy that's been identified. And I see that we've had some discussions, even a special finance committee meeting about the support for new business, and I see 1 position there. I'm wondering if that tells the whole story, or if the new business office is having additional support related to the supporting new connections. It seems surprising that 1 position would fix it all. What else is going on with that plan to improve new business?
Just starting maybe for the first one, just on the FMNO, we can provide you more details on the specific FMNO categories are going to be addressed with those positions, but certainly we focus on the ones that we've seen an increase in cost, not the ones that we've been holding relatively steady over time. As far as the new business, I mean, we did identify a need for an additional position to help support this. We are bringing other resources in on a temporary basis, just moving positions from different groups to help support. But I would say that the biggest effort right now, and there's a couple internal workshops to look at the processes. So, looking at the new business process, looking at the engineering process, as well as looking at how we do work in the field. We do find the front end is where most of the time can be made up, and not on the tail end with the construction portion of it. But we want to evaluate all aspects of our work to increase the efficiency of how that's done.
Yeah, if efficiency can make the balance of the efforts, that's fantastic news to only have to add 1 position and get all of the improvements we need. We did hear quite a lot in that special meeting about how our agency was becoming not just viewed, but really being the bottleneck for important housing development in the community. So just understanding that we're able to have a plan for addressing those challenges with the 1 FTE full time, and then perhaps additional limited term roles that are not on this slide. It'd be good to hear more about that before.
And I'm glad you brought that up too, because part of that too is a follow-up on our discussion with the applicants. There are certain things of the applicants that we have done in the past where we wait for the final approvals from the cities before we would say move forward with our designs. What we heard from the applicants is they're willing to take that risk, have us start doing our work before they get final approval if anything changes. So all these little pieces are going to help improve the timeline.
Dr. Coleman? And then Director Young.
Thank you. It's great to have all this. How many people are aging out or leaving the workforce? Because there's been contradictory reports saying because of the economy, less people are leaving, but then because of COVID, more people decided to leave. So how many positions are we expecting to be vacated due to retirement and such forth? And how does that play into these numbers up here?
Sophia, I'll just say that, you know, we have been seeing about 100 positions a year, kind of new staff kind of coming in. I think there are, as you said, so many pieces that are in flux, including just in our local economy, you know, the tech layoffs, and not everybody that's a tech layoff is necessarily a programmer, right? There's a whole host of people from, you know, administrative staff, you know, on through. So I think there are just so many pieces that are at flux that it's a difficult question to answer, and so we'll probably have to answer it after the fact.
So if we're going to answer after the fact, how is it going to create in terms of the vacancies? Let's say it's more than 100 a year for whatever reason. How's that going to impact the vacancy rate and the budget goals that we're trying to establish?
So if more people end up, if we have more turnover than we've anticipated, then what that would result in is a higher vacancy rate. And so we wouldn't be spending our budget as quickly as we had anticipated. So when it comes to budget performance and we come back, you know, either halfway through the year in January or at the end of the year, you know, to report numbers, we would say, well, we didn't spend as much on labor as we had anticipated because we just didn't have those positions. Now, if it's on the other side, which is, you know, we have people staying because of economic uncertainty, then those positions don't fill up. Then what happens with the vacancy rate is that it decreases. So we, you know, maybe have 4 or 5%. There is some vacancy rate that we build into naturally into the budget. And so it might mean that we consume more budget than we had anticipated, but hopefully we try to budget conservatively, so we hope we would be fine.
And last question along that area. Let's say we have the 100 vacancies. How much is the training time and cost? Because there's always an associated cost with vacancies, people being brought up to speed on what we do in training. How much is that part of the budget?
I mean, it's all built in within the budget. It depends on the position of how long it takes to get somebody coming in. Say a plumber, you come in with no experience in the Plumber 1 program, that's 3 years to get to Plumber 3. You know, other positions you can come in, almost hit the ground running. In terms of, say, an engineer you bring in, you know, to start with the design. So it does vary, but all that's factored in. We can provide more details on the retirements. I will say, since I've looked at these numbers, just during the pandemic, I think we did see an increase. But in the last 3 years, you know, 25% of the employees joined the district during the pandemic. So you can see, you know, see what kind of turnover we've seen.
Okay, thank you.
Director Young?
Yeah, on the, these charts are very helpful. I want to try to relate it to slide 38 in the, you know, the increase in labor cost. What of that 17.9% increase seems like most of it is the new position. How much of it is the new positions? How much of it is the raises in the contract?
Yeah, it's a good. There is one other thing that I promised General Manager Chan I wouldn't talk about again, which is the 27th paycheck. We've got this odd quirk in fiscal year 2024, right. So that's about 4% alone. Sorry to bring it up, boss, but it doesn't change anyone's pay. It's just a quirk of timing. So that's also why you don't see a big increase in the second year, is because that comes off the second year. So without that, it would smooth out that increase. So that's part of it. And then the increase in FTE, just for rough number, is the 3% in water. So if every position paid exactly the same, it would be 3% cost increase there. But, you know, I would say the positions we're adding, actually they're a mix. So we'd have to run the numbers of exactly average salary of those positions versus existing ones. New added FTE, like the counts you see here.
Yeah, the 27 or the 56 added,
yeah.
56, 57 added next year. Only one added the following year. So that seems like that's a big chunk of this number. Yeah?
Yes, you're correct there, but we can provide you a more detailed breakdown of how much is the 27th paycheck, Sam, versus
4%.
Yeah.
3.85.
I'm guessing that the biggest chunk of that is the new FTEs.
That's a big piece of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think I'll move to the next one. So that's through to staffing and capital. We've talked quite a bit about on multiple workshops so far this fiscal year, starting an infrastructure workshop to today. And you'll note that this 2.5 billion water system capital improvement program over the next 5 years will do a lot for our community and a lot to build a resilient system. So 127 miles of pipeline replaced over the next 5 years at Orinda Water Treatment, Upper San Leandro, some reservoir water treatment plant improvements in other ways, and other reservoir and pumping plant replacements. So this is a substantial investment in our long-term system reliability, safety, seismic reliability, and reducing leaks and other key board priorities. So shown another way is 3 budget cycles of 5-year CIPs. So 2 budgets ago is on the left, middle is a prior budget, and then the current budget on the right. And again, we're talking about expenses over the 5 years, not appropriations here. And so it is growing by 455 million into that into the current proposed 5-year CIP. And then of that 5-year CIP, the largest awards, we call them, or award purposes here, are in these areas. So water treatment, of course, significant investment there in the projects I mentioned on 2 slides ago. Also pipelines for the distribution system is the second largest category award purpose for our capital planning, and you'll see others here as well, all the way down to a category all other that fits in some other items. And one of the key ways we pay for capital is through debt, and we'll show that on the next slide of what breakdown of the percent of the capital program over the next 2 years will be paid by debt. But here we wanted to highlight that in the first top part of the chart there, we're showing our expected beginning of the year debt outstanding, and we'll retire 95.4 million in bonds in principal on our existing debt. And the plan is to issue 275 million in bonds. And so we would end with 2.78 or 79 billion in debt. So over that, I kind of wanted to walk that through. What numbers are these saying here? So over this 2-year period, debt outstanding for the water system, including the payoff of existing debt, will increase by 351 million. And you can see debt service there. Our existing debt service is the first line in the bottom half of the table. And then new debt, we expect to cost 18 million the first year, 36 million the second year. And the debt servicing cost, this is sort of the other side of paying for our debt, will increase very slightly. So total debt service there is listed, and we expect coverage of about 2 times these both years. And then debt funding of capital is another topic, and the board has set a target to not fund more than 65% of the capital improvement program using debt. So this proposed budget stays under that at 56.4 and 51.8% of the total capital expenses will be funded using debt. And then the rest, the other sources listed there, that is primarily operating revenue that's left over after paying our operating expenses or not used for operating expenses. It's also, there's some capital reimbursements like new connection costs. And finally, for this sort of targets and things we talk about are the reserves, and we expect our reserve balances to decline very slightly into the second year. That might have been me. And so the bulk of our reserves are for working capital and rate stabilization reserve, as well as reserves available for capital in the gray bar at the top. And the background, the very light gray in the back there, is just showing that our total reserves will be a little bit over 1 year of operating expenses. And finally, the rate dollars and fund important services. We like to talk about this at the end of each system presentation, and where does an average rate dollar go? Now, I'll note a water bottle full of EBMUD water would cost less than a penny. unless you had a very large water bottle. So it's not really $1, but you could really think of it as the portion of 1 cent. So, but here we're showing it in cents. So 52 cents goes to infrastructure improvements, including debt service. Daily operations of our water service is 31 cents, so you're already at 83 cents there. And the rest is for administration, customer service, natural resource management, and our regulatory and environmental compliance. So really, a lot of this goes directly to the pipes in the ground, the reservoirs above ground, and everything else we have that helps get us the water from the Sierra foothills down to the tap.
It's labor. What category is labor under?
Labor here.
Huh?
These includes labor. So there's labor and infrastructure improvements, labor and customer service. So it's breaking it up a different way, saying, well, of all of our dollars, which are both capital and labor, how does it break up in terms of function? What that yeah.
Usually I get asked that question.
So what percentage of our budget is labor?
Yes.
Okay.
Labor, yeah, thank you.
We can show.
You can answer, what percent of our operating budget is labor?
It's the largest piece.
It's the largest piece. I would even say, like back on slide 30, like we can compare it here together. So here is our total labor costs. So it's about 420 million.
Okay.
And then here is total expenses, about 1.1 billion.
Yeah.
So we're in the 38.
40%.
Yeah, 40% range is direct labor.
Thank you.
And I would note that another big chunk there, 20% or so is debt service, which that's the only category of these three that is not.
Debt service is paying for past labor.
Yes.
So labor and equipment and construction costs. But yeah, labor is what we do. Yeah.
How do we invest the reserve? What product is that invested in?
So actually, this afternoon, every month, we have the monthly investment transactions report, and it shows the breakdown actually in the board packet of what's in what federal securities and so on and so forth. But we have a pretty conservative. Safety, liquidity, yield is kind of our three, number one being safety of the deposits. The bulk of it is in government-backed securities and other similar products. But we do invest in some, corporate paper and so on. But the breakdown is in the board packet.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I really found it very helpful. I think it was a great presentation, and I really appreciated the way that you explained your reasoning for a lot of your assumptions, and that was really helpful. I just want to make sure that my assumption about labor is correct. So most of the FTE positions we're adding is due to infrastructure increases, right? Are you talking about plumbers? Or are you talking about construction workers as far as the new hires that you're projecting?
This is the chart, and so aging infrastructure. So that's that labor is directly related to infrastructure. The 27 and 15.
Is that just people in the field? I guess
The 15 is a mix. The first part is, I would say, mostly field positions. I'm going to look at Eric. Yeah, mostly, almost entirely field there, and then or entirely so. And then aging infrastructure is a real mix. So there are some
engineers.
Yeah.
okay.
So they're in the office, but they're also out in the field.
Right, both.
Meter replacement is also field stuff.
That's part of that. Okay. My second question has to do with the infrastructure costs. So is our largest project right now the Orinda treatment plant?
Certainly the largest one that's in construction, yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then that's what, 250 million?
That's about right.
250 million? Okay. And so what else is coming online that's as large as that, or?
Upper San Leandro,
And that's about the same, right?
yeah, similar. So about $500 million between those two.
Okay, and when are those projected? I'm just trying to get an idea when infrastructure is all in one category, how that's broken down into the different projects. I know we have the pipe replacement going on too as well.
Well, I don't know if this is exactly responsive, but when I'm asked by the public, what I say is 2/3 of our budget is about infrastructure and is about capital. So I don't know if it's an alternate way of answering the question.
I was just looking to go more granular. You know, like I do tell people, you know, about 250 million for Orinda and 250 for Upper San Leandro, but what percentage of our infrastructure budget goes for pipe replacement at this point?
Okay. How much is for pipe? We need to look that up. I don't know it off the top of my head. I don't know,
Yeah.
Jimmy, if you know off the top of your head either. We can look it up during the break.
There's that chart from the last set of budget workshops, I think, or maybe it was infrastructure. That's always helpful for me, that you open it up actually, and it shows over the next 30 years, I guess, of each like piece and what the rate of increase is and when it levels off and all of that. I think that might be quite helpful as a refresher for everybody, but for Director Chan potentially.
Thank you. I appreciate it. There's a lot to these budget slides, so I don't remember everything, but I wanted to ask you, like, in terms of the largest projects, Upper San Leandro Reservoir and Orinda, basically, does the board get updates at all on, like on overage charges, and is this project going on longer than we anticipated? Who oversees that project, and do they update the board?
So for these large projects, Orinda is one, and we'll do the same for USL. What the board had asked for is periodic updates. So we do send periodic info memos, and then on an annual basis, we can come back and update the board. So you can see the progress on the projects.
Yeah, and see whether or not we're on budget. And
Yeah.
okay.
And then so I understand what you're asking for here. This is showing the 5-year CIP, but what you're interested in is by these same categories, you want to see it on an annual basis?
So over the next 5 years, the biggest piece are those two, the Upper San Leandro and Orinda at roughly $500 million, and then pretty close to that is the amount that we're spending on the pipelines.
Yeah, I guess I'm not asking for each category. I was just asking about the infrastructure funds in general and where it's going.
Maybe
on a more
the chart
regular
that
basis.
Director Young mentioned, we can start there maybe. And
So for specific projects?
Yeah.
Got it.
I mean, if someone asks which project is the largest that you're working on, I want to be able to be responsive to that. And, we talk about pipeline replacement. Well, how much of that budget is pipeline replacement? Thanks.
I want to put a plug in for the great work my team does in the budget office. The volume 2 book of the proposed budget has a description of every award, which is sort of the level that we budget at, and it has a paragraph or 3 or 4 on each of the big areas. And so if you ever have a resident who's really, really, really into this, you could send them the PDF of this, and it's posted on our website, because it really gives a lot of interesting detail on these awards, but more than you probably want to answer your question today. So
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Director Patterson?
Just one thing I want to point out, because we're moving into new territory, and I'm fully supportive to date of where we're going on our budget. I also have some responsibility to people, both in my family and outside, that check with me and consult with me. And I'm always concerned about the ratepayer. As you know, California's population is diminishing, going down. As we plan and move out, I'm just being mindful of what the constituents that we have are going through. So with less of a base going forward predicted, I don't know what the actual is. It could not be, because every sector doesn't go down at the same time. I'm hoping that we maintain some stability from the programs that are meant to bring people back into compliance so they can be counted. A lot of people who are out of homes and whatnot, and all of them have needs. But I also know that with the expenditures from the state, federal level and elsewhere, those are all going up. So the consumer or constituent has to expect more expense there. In terms of their living expenses, you know, basic things like the rent cap is coming off and going up. All of the things that they go through day by day, the consumption items, food costs are up, transportation is up, everything that you can think of, including the maintenance and clothing and all those expenses, that's what they look at. My advice to some folk who got rebates is don't spend it, save it, hold on to it. And some called me because PG&E went sky high and they were able to meet the burden. So I'm always listening in 2 years so that this can be consistent. And I say that to say we're the least of the problem. We're the best of the problem. And it helps me interpret to community groups and whatnot the fact that the costs related to water and wastewater services are not that high. And they should be conscious of the fact that we're doing our job over here to make sure that happens. So I compliment staff for bringing this in, and it keeps me in a balanced position as well. Thank you.
Questions?
On Bill, I'd like to see the slide that shows how we compare to other agencies.
We have at the end,
Oh, it's, okay.
at the end of the packet.
All right, okay. That's always helpful.
We're gonna make you sit through wastewater after a break, and then we'll show you that slide, Director McIntosh.
We have about 35 minutes left for the remaining half. If you'd like, we could take a 5-minute break. We have a fairly short closed session. So I think we won't go too far into closed session, if that's okay with you, President Katz.
Break.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break.
All right. If you don't mind, I'll get started on the wastewater system. Thank you all. Is that okay? You're mid-bite, President Katz. Okay. So wastewater system here, key budget assumptions are the first thing. So these slides I'm going to move even a little bit quicker for, but raise your hand or indicate if I'm moving a little too fast. But they're the same as the water system slides, just for the wastewater system. So here we're looking at the key budget assumptions for the wastewater system. And we see the rate increase there that's proposed today. And then the cost per day is 89 cents. It proposed in 24 and 96 cents proposed in 25, which is about a 7 cents increase in both years. And again, maintaining debt service coverage of about 2 times over those 2 years. So still as affordable as good service will allow. And then in terms of operating revenues, compared to the water system, it is a slightly more diverse set of revenues. Treatment charges are 57%, wet weather facilities charges are 20%, and then resource recovery, what can be a volatile revenue source, is 6%, property taxes 4%, and on there. Interest income, again, I'll note, has had a significant increase due to the interest rates environment today. And so then here you'll see the total operating revenues compared to the 23 projection. And again, similar story, there's increases largely across the board in many areas with SCCs or the capacity charges on this side are a little bit lower in expectations compared to prior years. And then on wastewater expense side, you'll see the one difference between the water system and the wastewater system in terms of the trends, besides the sheer size of the dollar amounts here. The trend difference here is that the capital cash flow, I guess similarly, capital cash flow is growing both years, but it's not growing quite as fast in this first year, the 24 budget, but there is a larger increase in the 25 budgeted year for that capital cash flow. And you'll see increases in general operating expenses as well. And when we talk labor, it's the balance between capital and operating is a little bit different. We expect a larger increase in the capital labor costs as compared to the operating labor costs, but still a significant increase due to both new positions as well as these other factors that we talked about for the water system. And then a slightly a small increase in the second year for the 25 budget in labor in both operating and capital. And then staffing summary here is a 14.5 FTE increase in the FY24 budget. There is an increase of those in limited term or temporary construction. I'll note that there is, based on feedback, that number will change in the adopted budget, down by 1 in the limited term area and up by 1 in the full-time areas for 295 both years and 8 in the limited term. And most of that added staff of 14.5 is also going to aging infrastructure, as well as aging infrastructure and reducing contracting out. So the 12 total of the 14.5 are in that area. There's in the aging infrastructure area are engineers and other positions that aren't necessarily directly related to contracting out, but are again investments in the wastewater infrastructure and the growing CIP in that system. And then there's also a couple more positions to highlight: improved power operator coverage, 1 more FTE there. Also a potential partnership on private sewer lateral inspections. That is a potential partnership, so we're adding the FTE and funding for it. But if the partnership does not come to fruition, we would not fill that position. So it really depends on, can we come to an agreement with the city that would potentially like us to do private sewer lateral inspections. And then half a position for workforce development. Oh, I'm sorry, Director Coleman.
Just a quick question. I know we talked about it on the water side for a grant writer. Is that grant writer also going to do work for both sides? So that's going to, is it going to be 50-50 each way in terms of positions?
Gets covered in kind of a general and administrative kind of charge that gets back charged to wastewater. So it's not direct, it's indirect.
Okay.
And so their time, I would say in a given year, it may fluctuate between more, like there's this current project that actually current wastewater staff, the $30 million project Sophia mentioned earlier, a grant from FEMA. You know, if we had the grant writer and they were working on it, it might have been a lot of their year was spent on that year, but then the next year there might be very little on wastewater. So it'll vary based on the activity. Okay. Went backwards. And then wastewater system investments are planned $335 million over the 5-year period. It includes some of the major board priorities and KPI items that are necessary, including, you know, one big item that has come up to the board a lot over the last 2 years that I've been here, that these sewer pipeline segments, the interceptors that connect cities to wastewater treatment, we call it this way to be a little more hopefully accessible to the community, but you all know them as interceptors. You know, doing more work on those segments. Also rehab of secondary reactors clarifiers, new dewatering building there at the bottom, as Sophia mentioned, that is a part of the 5-year CIP, where a lot of the planning and design work will happen in the first 4 years, with construction starting in the 5th year and continuing for 5 years. So through the end of that 10-year CIP, towards the end. And then seismic retrofit of some of our highest occupancy buildings on the wastewater treatment plant. And so in terms of comparison to prior budget cycles, this is a substantial increase in the 5-year CIP over those 5 years, growing by $91.5 million. So when we talk about the increase of $500 million or more than $500 million in the combined district-wide, it's because 455 is coming from water increase CIP, 91.5 coming from the wastewater. So it's right around 550 or so. And then here are the major awards in the 5-year CIP. Interceptors is the largest single source of expenditures, or I guess use of funds in the CIP over the 5 years. Nutrients is the second. Most of that spending, if you look in the detail in Volume 1 or Volume 2 of the budget, is in the end of the 5 years. So there's a lot of planning, design, review and planning, various types of planning in the first couple of years of the CIP, with more work expected towards the end. And then general improvements include some of that seismic work, primary treatment and preliminary treatment there, secondary treatment as well. So, and then dewatering, again, a big portion of the expenses, though there's a lot more in the 10-year CIP. And then debt outstanding will grow by, given the smaller size of the wastewater system, a much smaller amount than the water system. So it's $24.5 million over the 2-year period here. So paying, I explained this table before, but paying off is that, 14.7 million and 15.8 paying off principal, and then issuing 25 and 30 million in new bonds. And that'll lead to debt service that grows to about 35 million by the end of fiscal 25. And again, maintaining strong coverage of about 2 times above the target. And then in terms of the debt funding of capital, it remains below that 65% policy set by the board at 49 and 50% for the 2 years, other sources being primarily revenue from after we pay for operations. And then in terms of reserves, a very similar chart again, that we have reserves that exceed the operating expenses each year, and most of that is made up by working capital reserve, and as well as the rate stabilization reserve. There's no planned increases to the rate stabilization reserve among the 2 years. It's at a very healthy place today. And then reserves available for capital, others, folks might ask in the public, what's the difference between working capital and reserves available for capital? Reserves available for capital is really after we meet our policy targets, how much is available to pay for capital over the next couple of years. It's part of our strategy of debt issuance as well, that we can use reserves to pay for capital before issuing bonds when it's best for market purposes or planning purposes. And finally, this new chart I had fun making, I'll admit, how rate dollars fund important work on the wastewater side. So similar categories here: infrastructure improvements and the daily operations of wastewater treatment are 81%. Environmental regulatory compliance is 12 cents or 12%. Administration is about 6 cents, and that's including the payments to the water side for things like my time, Sophia's time, payments from finance, HR, equity programs as well. And then customer service, a portion of the call center, and billing and education work on the water side, as well as education work on the wastewater side as well. And so that's it for the wastewater system. Any questions before I turn it back to Sophia for rates and charges?
For capturing visually the bay protection mission in the handy chart. I don't know what bridge we're looking at.
I was sorry you noticed. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thanks.
I'll save mine for later. I have a question about the water bottle chart that we can. I like the visual. It sort of breaks down a little bit, so I'd like to we can have an offline conversation about it.
Happy.
It's fine.
All right, well, with that, we'll jump into the last section of this budget workshop, the recommended rates and charges. So with respect to some of our key rate planning assumptions, we have increased borrowing rates by around 5%. We've also increased the interest earning rate. So that's reflective of what we talked about before. We are able to earn more on our investments, and that's positive. So our last budget was at 0.25%, and so this is more than 10 times higher. On the water sales side, we are going to be going into the budget with 139.7 MGD in FY24 and 143.9 in FY25. Just for reference, in FY22, our budget was 144.3 and actual was 143.9. And we believe that we're going to end this fiscal year around 137. So that 139.7 is slightly higher. We do often see a slight uptick after the sort of conclusion end of a drought. On the power revenue side, we don't anticipate we are increasing power revenues for this next year, but we don't anticipate they'll be quite as high as they have been in FY 2023. We could end this year with more than $20 million at this point in power revenues. So we're not going to budget quite that high, but certainly more than we have in past years. In discussions with O&M, given the kind of move from reliance on natural gas in the state of California, O&M believes that the value of hydro will continue to increase. Commercial paper costs, those interest costs are growing up to 4%, and then we're taking back down to 3% in that next fiscal year because we have been paying more this last year. As we've said, those rates have varied tremendously. So during the pandemic, there were times we paid 0.1%, and again, this is the variable portion of our debt portfolio. On the wastewater side, we have continued to be conservative around resource recovery revenues as we look to kind of balance nutrients with that power work and the corresponding PGS energy revenues. So when we look at our rate increases, what we see here is that the last 2 years, fiscal 22-23, the rate increases there, 4% during the pandemic kind of moderated down since we didn't know what was going on with the economy and with our ratepayers, but still enabling us to move forward. And then the proposed increases for this year, which come in at 8.5% and 8.5%. Now, again, for the average monthly single-family residence, that's based on 8 CCF. And again, a reminder that our average and our median are not the same. The median single-family residential customer is using 6 CCF, and that's pulled upwards by those single-family residential customers using greater than 6 and 8, essentially. But we're talking about a 20 cent a day increase on the water side for the first year, and roughly 20 cents again in the second year. So at the end of the 2 years, a total of 40 cents a day higher than it has been. On the wastewater side, we're again coming in at 8.5% and 8.5% for the wastewater side, and that total average monthly single-family residential bill will show more breakdown later, coming in for FY24 at about $27 and about $29 in FY25. This is based on 6 CCF, and again, we're looking not to bill 100% of your water use for wastewater because not all of that use is consumptive, right? So not every drop of water is coming to the wastewater plant. Much of that water, or a good portion of it, is used outdoor. And so there's actually a cap on single-family monthly residential wastewater bills at 9 CCF. So this was the chart that Director McIntosh was looking forward to seeing, and this is our annual water charges for single-family residents as compared with other water service providers in our area. So I think we dropped one notch over where we are. We've put a lot of detail on here just because there are some agencies that are still in drought, others that haven't yet provided what their next year's rate will be. So, for example, you see North Marin, that's their 2022 year rate, but it does include their drought surcharge. Palo Alto above it, this is their proposed rate that they're currently in the process of doing 218 noticing work on. You'll see ours also is proposed pending direction from the board, and a note here, we did receive San Francisco noticed new rates going forward just this week, and so that new number would be $1,246. I will note that San Francisco always complains about our chart because they say nobody uses 8 CCF in San Francisco, so that's their response. But it's always going to be difficult to do apples and apples on something like this. Pleasanton, very, very low.
8 CCF, okay.
That's correct. That all of these bills are based on an average of 8 CCF. So it's not the average bill in that community. It is to show apples and apples of this amount of water in EBMUD versus that same amount of water in any other community. So moving on to the next chart, there's the annual wastewater bill for a single-family residential customer as well. So this includes treatment and collection because most agencies are a single agency providing both of those services. Again, as a reminder to the public, at East Bay MUD, we provide only treatment, and the collection is provided by our partner agencies such as City of Oakland, City of Berkeley, Piedmont, Stige, et cetera. And so again, we do have a modified KPI that's no more than the treatment average of our peer agencies, so about half of that bill. So the new proposed total, if we include the average of all those agencies, coming in at just under $1,000. So we're still sort of in the high end. We've had questions over time. How on earth does Ora Loma maintain such a low bill there, $400? I worked as a consultant to Ora Loma many years ago, and that's not a sustainable number. They will have to make investments in their infrastructure, and so that bill will be creeping up over time. They have not made investments in their infrastructure. So this is the wastewater side. Water charges are driven primarily by usage at East Bay MUD. We have a very heavy volume-driven set of service charges. So looking at the millions of dollars that come in on the monthly service charge versus the volume charge, you can see $200 million projected for FY24 versus $433 on the volume charge. The elevation surcharge paid to those that live in zones 1 and 2, not in zone 0, in effect, about $35 million to pay for the hard costs, the actual facilities, and the energy to pump to those who are living at elevation. Single-family residential water charges on the bill. This is the chart that will be in the Proposition 218 notice that we propose to send out. This breakdown by quartile had been requested by the grand jury, and so we continue to show it. 25th, 50th, 75th, and then we show 95th percentile at 4, 6, 10, 24, with the average again at 6, and our median, average at 8, sorry, and the median as 6. It shows the total bills there. And then as requested by Director Young, quintiles 20th, 40th, 60th, 80th, and 95th. I do want to point out, though, that the way that the quintiles and the quartiles work, it's the edge of that percent. And so the average, for example, use between 0 and 20 would be 2.2 CCF per month. Between 20 and 40, the average would be 4.5 CCF. Between 40 and 60 would be 6.5 CCF, 60 to 80 would be 9.2 CCF, and 80 to 100 would be 22.4 CCF. The way that we bill, we round to a nearest whole unit. Yes, Director Coleman.
When you're looking at the bill, let's say the $53.14, does that cover the entire bill, or is that just some portion of the bill?
This is the entire bill, a water bill, for someone at that particular use level.
Because my usage was, I think, 62 gallons a day, but I paid $170. Now, I know I have an elevation charge.
And also it's bi-monthly. Your bill would be for
Right.
2 months. So 170 divided by the 2, and then you would have paid your elevation surcharge.
But the elevation surcharge is 5% of the bill, right?
It's not a percent. It's based on the actual units, and there's a rate per CCF that's paid.
I'm just having a hard time jiving. What is 100? Let's say what is 70 gallons a day? Which percentile?
70 gallons per day. 200 is the average, so 70 is very low. Right. So it would be
Using that much.
Yeah, close.
Okay. It just doesn't seem to jive here for what my bill is.
If you'd like to bring your bill in, we can look at it together. Okay. All right. So this is just showing how the rates impact multifamily residential and non-residential water users. So again, up to 4 units, what we see here, average use of about 25. So if you think about it, 6 being an average family usage, 6 times 4 is 24. You can see there the 5+ units at 50. So this is, north of 10 units, probably maybe 10 to 15 units, and then there's the commercial and industrial users. The wastewater charges that appear on the water bill. So for an average single-family residential user with a 5/8 meter, again, in the portion of our service area that we serve wastewater use at 6, and again, a bill there for FY24 of $26.98. So just again, the $27 and about $29 at the end once fiscal year 25 starts, end of 24, start of 25. The maximum bill there, again, 9 CCF. And so again, for FY24, 31.63 and 34.28. And then again, it shows it for the multifamily units, 4 units, 5+ units, and the commercial and industrial. We do have a wastewater wet weather facilities charge that is billed on the property tax bill. There's a separate hearing process that the board goes through and an action that's taken to place these on the property tax bill. So for small lots of 5,000 square feet or less, the FY24 charge at $135.82 proposed for FY24, $147.38 for FY25. The medium lot between 5 and 10,000, and then those large lots over 10,000 square feet. So those largest lots at the start of FY25 paying $526 annually. So at the board's places, we've placed a draft copy of the Proposition 218 notice. This is similar to the notice that we sent 2 years ago. We have tried to take advantage of the space to message information to our ratepayers here, working with public affairs and our excellent graphics team. And if you have any small comments that you think you see a nit or something you'd like us to correct, please let us know by Thursday, March 30th at noon. The idea is that mailing would be complete by the last week in April, so that we have met the 45-day notice requirements of the California Constitution for our June 13th public hearing. So we also will be coming back with the actions for the board to take in the early summer on our proposed water and wastewater capacity charges, and our water system SCC has been updated using our 2021 SCC study methodology, and you'll recall that decreased overall by about 30% the SEC rates, with the new calculations for engineering news record construction cost index and depreciation on facilities, additions, et cetera. The increases range from just under 8% to about 8.6% from the prior year's rates. On the wastewater capacity fee side, again, that study was completed in 2019, and so the range is from 6.8 to 7.5% on those FY23 rates. And just with respect to what the actual amount is for a single-family residence, since there's only one rate, we don't have regions on the wastewater side, it increases to $3,170 from just under $3,000. And again, those would go into effect on July 1. So this shows the regions on the water side, Region 1, Region 2, Region 3, and again, the estimated use based on what we know of usage in this area of 190, 210, and 490 gallons per day, shows our current SCCs and what the proposed would be with the increases. And again, they're different because the facilities are different, depreciation of facilities are different, et cetera, in each one of those regions, the average age of facilities, et cetera. On the water SEC side, these are those rates and how they manifest for multifamily residential in each of those regions. And the board will recall that we did create during our SCC study a small dwelling unit, less than 500 square foot, reflective of the fact that there are some very small dwelling units that are being constructed as part of the increase in multifamily residential, high-rise housing in the East Bay. So on the water SEC non-residential side, again, these are the three zones and the charges, and those are applied based on, again, the region and the water use. With regards to outreach and next steps, we are currently at the step of the proposed budget workshop 2, and so it's now almost completed, March 28th. Pending approval by the board, we would notify the public of these proposed rates via the Proposition 218 notice that we've provided, and do work on social media, through our website, bill insert, and community briefings. We have started the community briefings. General Manager Chan mentioned that in his opening remarks, and we'll be continuing those through to the date of the hearing on June 13th. We will be coming back in May on May 9th with the General Manager's report and recommendation on our rates and charges, and then the public hearing itself would be on June the 13th, with an additional hearing later for placement of wastewater wet weather billing to be placed on the property tax bill for Alameda County. The implementation would take place on July 1 if those rates were approved. So with that, this is just a small sort of summary of the work that's been that will be going on. The Proposition 218 notice, the Budget and Rates Roadshow, which is ongoing. If there are additional community groups that any of the board members are aware of that you'd like to add to that calendar, please let Mona Favorite Hill know, or of course you can let me know, or the General Manager, of course. We will be holding an Upper San Leandro Infrastructure Open House, where there will be some elected officials and the community will be invited as well. And there will be work, particularly during the May-June period right before the hearing, including a press release and any media interviews, as well as a media event on infrastructure investment. So in the meantime, we continue to work to try to get the word out through community and city newsletters, our website, the pipeline that goes out with bills, and through our Water Wednesday webinar series. And June 7th is one that, will have a particular focus in this area. In terms of internal in-reach, employee and employee outreach, we just have held meetings with the unions in the last few days. I think the unions would prefer to have those earlier, as I understand, so we'll work to incorporate that feedback. Splashes and meetings and presentations with departments and divisions and others as requested. So, and we have usually done one sort of noontime presentation that's general on Zoom for those that are interested as well. So with that, we'll take any questions and feedback.
Director Chan?
So when is the USL infrastructure open house?
I'm not sure. Mona, do you know what the date is? April 27th.
And did we have one of these for Orinda too? Since
Yes,
those are
there
two-
was. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, there were some wonderful. There was a focus that I haven't ever seen at the district before, with some little vests for the kids to wear and little like hard hats. I think that was kind of a hit. And lots of horn. Okay.
That's April 27th. What time?
We have scheduled from
9 to noon.
9 a.m. to noon.
And Director Patterson is scheduled to be there right now, because it's in his ward.
Oh, okay. Upper San Leandro Reservoir?
It's in East Oakland.
That's right. It's the Oakland side. The Upper San Leandro Reservoir?
It doesn't actually have any San Leandro in it.
Oh, because I went to the Upper San Leandro Reservoir. I thought was the beginning where the Christmas tree farm is, and that's Castro Valley. That's close to the Upper San Leandro Reservoir, right?
The Christmas tree farm is
Yeah.
right near. It's on the road to Upper San Leandro Reservoir.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you.
I also would like to thank Sam and his first year as budget manager and his team, many of whom were new, for putting together, I think, a really excellent budget book and budget presentation this year. We also put in a new software, as the board is aware, LC this last year, and mixed. We're still working through many things, but one of the successes was this budget book and very minimal overtime, whereas in previous years, the budget has required substantial overtime. So that's been a success.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I really, very good.
Thanks. Director McIntosh.
Excellent presentation. Thank you. Thank you very, very much, and easily understood. I'd like to see a slide breakdown showing when you talk about water sales and key budget assumptions. I'd like to see a slide with showing the last 20 years of our budget assumption and reality. To see how often those twains meet. That would be really helpful for me, because I always think in terms, water agencies rely on water sales, and yet we call for more and more conservation, and it's a conundrum. And we call for more and more conservation. That's a good thing, but it affects our bottom line, and we have to come up with other resources to sort of make up that difference as the years go by. And I've been hammering for new revenues for many years now. And, we're just living on the shifting sand. And I think, time might be running out. It's not sustainable. So I would like to see those key assumptions on water sales relative to the budget, because it really makes me nervous.
Thanks. I actually, in case anyone asked a question, I have my own little pocket slide, which I can show you afterwards, but you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, and we'll provide it to the entire board that shows really the major assumption is water sales.
Yeah.
That's
it.
Water consumption has dropped about 25% since fiscal year 07. So it's,
and
as you said, the rates have to reflect that because,
Yeah, the rates have to reflect it, or we need to
come
offset
with other
by
revenue
a new
sources.
source
Correct.
of revenue.
Yes. Director Young.
First let me echo the helpful presentation, and it was extremely helpful to get a draft
Beforehand. Yes.
Well beforehand to look at. The conundrum, I had a couple things. One is that, following on Director McIntosh's comment, is that as that, that 25% drop in consumption, it's also kind of understanding where that's fallen and who it's had the most impact on. I mean, at least as I think about it, people that use less water are shouldering, even though, it's that 65% is variable and 35% is fixed, those who use less water shoulder, I think, more of that decrease because, or actually, I don't quite I'm struggling with how that relationship over time has impacted people that have done the most to use the least water as a good thing. And this dialectic of water sales as a revenue source, or as, the primary thing driving our ability to conduct business. And yet, it just, there's something missing in the way that, sort of at least in the way that I understand this or want to understand this. And maybe it's actually, does this goes back to this water bottle idea, which I love the idea of looking at how much does a dollar buy, but I think it's a little bit confusing to have it be a water bottle because we say, oh, that water bottle actually only costs a penny. So is it 100 water bottles that cost, is it does a dollar actually buy 100 gallons of sort of what's the actual dollar buy?
Yeah.
And what's the dollar buy for somebody that uses, 1,000 gallons of water a day versus the dollar buy for somebody that uses 50, right? Because it's
So,
different. I buy
yes.
less water for my $50 than the person that I think.
Well, I would say the first $50 buy is the same amount, but your point is that the fixed charge dominates for lower users.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing that I would say that's part of our public presentation, General Manager Chan bought a bottle of so-called smart water for $2.99, about this big, at the grocery store. And so what we've been saying as part of our public presentation is, for less than $2.99, 60% of the single-family residences in our household are for currently about $2.50 a day. Waking up in the morning, hopping in the shower, putting on some water for a cup of coffee, maybe watering some plants, although not today because it's raining, putting a load of laundry in, maybe putting the dishwasher on. And there may be multiple people in this household, before they even start their day. And so that, we think that's smart water, and that's, 300 gallons rather than, this one little bottle of smart water. So,
Right.
Yeah. And I think we can also share with you, I mean, to really, I think, understand that you have to go back into the 70s when you look at the demographics. I mean, there's also been shifts in industry leaving the area and growth in San Ramon and Danville, and, to offset that. So to understand how the costs have shifted, around or not, we need to look at how the demographics have changed over the decades too.
Yeah. And then my other, and this also sort of follows on Lisa's, is that I just wish we could get. I think that we have a little bit, our glasses are a little bit too much rose-colored for the future than they are. And it ends up coming around and hitting us. I do know that whatever we project today about 4 years from now, the only thing I know is that it won't be the same. It won't be what we projected. It'll be something different, right? We don't know,
That's
what
correct.
that is. And I think when we tell people, or we set out a projection that our rates are the percentage increases are gonna be lower in the next biennium, I don't know how many times I can sell that when it doesn't come true.
Yeah.
And that's
in fairness, we did project that we would be at 5% last time, and we did go lower. The board
yeah, I know we
supported.
did. Yeah.
So one time we did.
Right. So I don't know how to solve that riddle, but I just, before we put out projections that things are going to go down, we should be pretty sure that we can go down.
Yeah.
With the infrastructure investment that we're making and the uncertainty associated with how well we'll do at coming in at what we said we were going to spend on those things, I'm just wary about, anything that we say about the future that's, it's still going to go up. I tell everybody, it's like, if you're expecting us to ever say your water bill is going to go down, you'll be disappointed. Exactly. Because it's going to go up, and just get that out of the way. So I appreciate that. I'm really glad that we've made some progress on the FMNO, question, and I hope we'll make more progress on that in future budget cycles as we understand what our ongoing demand is for positions. I'm a little worried about meeting the positions that we need to fill, because it's a lot between the normal, natural turnover plus, 30. So we're basically 30% increase in our if we lose, usually turnover 100, we're adding almost 30 to that. That's I just hope we're up to the challenge of being able to hire those positions so that we can get that work done.
Can you remind me how much we have in reserves again?
This morning's report from the Finance Administration Committee showed that we were, I think it was around 770 million that is currently collective reserves of water, wastewater, and the JPAs for whom we stored funds.
Okay. Thank you.
And the bulk of that obviously is the district. So.
This is very well done.
Thank you to everyone that worked on the 218 notice.
Well, yeah, we don't have a lot of deliberation, that's mandatory because we've already directed in our last workshop the range. So, in prior years, we were still undecided about the specific number that we would direct for the Prop 218 notice until the second workshop. But in this case, we did settle on a scenario at our first workshop. So we've been able to receive a pretty steady presentation about exactly what budget is recommended. So we have our decision making is a lot easier with a one track presentation before us that's consistent with what we asked for. So that makes our discussion here so much easier. I can already tell because we're just mostly talking about some of the details about how how we're running and what we're expecting in this budget cycle. There's a lot of the questions were answered either through the slides or in discussion or can be supplemented after the workshop. I'm interested in a couple things that I think can be done in budget, but to the extent that they do need attention in the budget, I'd like to just make a couple of those comments right now. Before I say those, I'll agree with Director Young that having our future projections really be as close to reality and not just be rosy is a good thing. I think that's really the reason why we put those future projections. We don't want to just look right or look how we would wish the world would be, but really they should be realistic. And I feel like 6% is actually realistic. Previously we would say that things would settle to 5. It never happened, and at least saying 6 feels more realistic. It may be higher, it may be lower. We certainly did take a big break in the last budget cycle to come down to 4% in recognition of where the economy is. In this budget cycle, we need to make up for that, and by being not that much higher than inflation, and making up for our last budget cycle being lower than inflation, this makes a lot of sense, and in those respects is modest, but also still keeping up with the infrastructure needs. And so thanks to the staff for your guidance on how to make sure that we provided those investments adequately. I'm appreciative that we're looking forward to all of the capital needs and employing the use of a management analyst in a grant writing capacity. I'm very excited to see the FMNO policy problems getting reflected in increased staffing. I like that that we are also implementing some of the changes that are able to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And I'm also glad to see some recognition of building in educational outreach, particularly for outdoor education and some of those transportation barriers. As we start to see, and here's some of the new things, as we start to see an increase in capital, I think it would be good to reopen the project labor agreement discussion that the board left off at. Things ended fairly abruptly because we were focused on a pilot program. But given that the capital improvement program is increasing so significantly, I think it would be good to look at a comprehensive picture and see just where we can go to complete that initiative that may still have the ability to get completed. So I'd like to, if we need budget resources to analyze that. I'm making that comment now, but in general, I think that that's something that can happen outside of the immediate budget, and within the budget is what I mean. Second, I think we can have more of these discussions in detail at the Sustainability Committee, but I do see that we have capital awards identified for fleet replacement, and to the extent that we are maximizing being a pioneering agency in acquiring zero emission vehicles in the heavy duty sector, I'd like to see us being a leader in that area. So if we need to make sure that the budget can accommodate a leadership role in that area, I think it would be good to build in just enough to be able to make some pilot acquisitions as appropriate. So I don't think it would significantly change the staffing aspects of the budget, but I would like to make sure that we are considering that, and so if it does need to be reflected in the budget, I'm making that comment, but I think we can have those discussions more in depth at Sustainability Committee.
Yes, and we're actually already planning to bring the project labor agreement discussion in a couple of months to the committee to talk about. And we'll continue to look at the medium and heavy duty vehicles, and we can share some of the challenges that what's out there, both in terms of availability and how we do our work.
Thank you.
Director Patterson?
A final thought that I would like to leave with staff, and I think it's been a great presentation. I already said that, so not to be redundant, my concern is that people know that we're representing their interests. In the past, we've had some ups and downs about the State Water Agency Board and whatnot and where they come in. I want to make it absolutely clear that we should not be paying for their existence. They're authoritarian. They should be paid for by the state. They don't do it at the love of the ratepayer, so they shouldn't be draining our coffers. We're doing everything we can to keep the lid on and to keep their interests up high. And anything that the state does should be funded, like welfare or anything else, by the state. I just wanted to make that statement. I told that to some of our legislative people too when I was in Sacramento.
Any other comments about, Clifford, did you have a?
No, if there are no other comments from the board, I also want to take an opportunity to thank Sophia, Sam, and the entire team. They did a fantastic job, and this was, again, Sam's first time, and excellent job.
Yeah, I think everybody has said at least something in this presentation to comment. So last call for comments on the budget, and seeing none, we will. I believe we took public comment at the beginning, so we will close the meeting now.
If get us our comments back, if you send it to Risha, would probably be the easiest. If you have any comments on the 218 notice.
We will approve it at our public public hearing on Tuesday, June 13th, 2023. If we had dueling scenarios, we would make that direction now. I do see a hand for public comment. We are running into our closed session time, but I will recognize the public comment. Please provide a speaker card to the secretary after you comment. Go ahead, Yvette Rivera.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It'll take 30 seconds. I hope that this board considers implementing a whistleblower policy that would bring light to fraud, waste, and abuse at EBMUD to safeguard ratepayers' interest. If you have an avenue for employees to do that in a safe place, you may be able to save our ratepayers a lot of money. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. And we will be adjourned and reconvene in closed session in approximately, Risha, would you say 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Okay.